Betrayal, I used to think, was a thing of shadow and alleyways, a knife wielded by a stranger in the dark. I never imagined it would wear a familiar face, the one that smoothed my hair and tucked the blankets under my chin as a child. I was 26 when I learned the truth, when the monster I'd spent my life looking for in the shadows stepped into the light and called me daughter. For years, my life had been a grueling, uphill climb on a ladder made of broken promises and deferred dreams. I'd navigated the treacherous terrain of unpaid internships, surviving on cheap coffee and the flimsy hope of a future. I'd endured the soul-crushing anonymity of temp gigs, my identity reduced to a temporary login and a task list. Then, after a relentless siege on the fortress of corporate America, the walls finally crumbled. I landed a coveted position as a corporate strategist at a leading renewable energy firm in Chicago. It was the kind of job that felt like a myth, the kind you whisper about in hushed tones, terrified that speaking it aloud might spook it away. The offer letter in my hand felt heavier than any book I'd ever held, a testament to every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every ounce of will I'd poured into its creation. I didn't just occupy the role, I consumed it. I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. My voice, once hesitant, learned to command attention in meetings filled with men twice my age. I devoured data, I built predictive models in my sleep, and I lived and breathed strategy. My dedication paid off. Within a year, a promotion materialized, one that felt like a dream within a dream, executive liaison to the chief operating officer. I was in the inner sanctum, and that's when they started to notice me again. My parents. "Look at our daughter, Alyssa," my mother's Facebook post would read, a picture of me from my company's website plastered beneath the text, "Making us so proud in her fancy little job." The words were a bitter pill, as if they had laid a single brick in the foundation of my success, as if they hadn't spent the entirety of my childhood holding me up against the dazzling light of my younger sister, Laya, only to point out my shadows. Laya, the golden child, the sun around which our family's sad little solar system orbited. She was a masterpiece of beautiful, charming chaos. She drifted through 2 different colleges before flunking out of both, a feat she framed as an act of rebellion against a stifling system. She'd cycled through 6 careers: yoga instructor, artisan jeweler, lifestyle blogger. Each one abandoned the moment it required actual effort. I once made the mistake of lending her my car for a weekend. It came back with a windshield that looked like a spider web of shattered glass, and tucked neatly in the glove compartment, a receipt for $1,000 worth of human hair extensions. My parents' adoration never wavered. "You should be more like your sister," my dad's voice would echo in my memory, a constant, grating refrain from my teenage years. "She's a free spirit, Alyssa. She knows how to live." No, she was just irresponsible, a beautiful ship with no anchor, drifting on the endless ocean of their indulgence. But now I had something they couldn't dismiss or ignore. I had success, a tangible, irrefutable monument to my worth. They didn't celebrate it, though. They coveted it, and they began to plot its theft. The erosion was subtle at first, a slow, creeping tide of exclusion. It started with strange whispers at work, sidelong glances in the hallway that lingered a moment too long. My boss, Victor, a man whose trust I had painstakingly earned, suddenly began omitting me from the CC line on critical strategy emails. I, the executive liaison, was no longer in the loop. Then I was quietly pulled from 2 major projects, the kind I had championed from their inception. The explanations were vague, corporate non-answers designed to placate, not inform. "We're restructuring the team's focus. We're shifting some priorities." Then came the summons that chilled my blood. An email from Human Resources with the subject line, "Confidential Wellness Check-in." Just a routine meeting, they assured me as I sat across from a woman with a practiced, sympathetic smile. Except it was. "We've received some concerns, Alyssa," she murmured, her eyes avoiding mine, fixed on a file on her desk that I knew with sickening certainty had my name on it. There was a call. From someone claiming to be a close family member. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "They said you've been struggling, that you've been under immense mental strain, that you've had breakdowns in the past. Is there any truth to this?" I froze. The air in the sterile, beige room seemed to crystallize, each molecule a tiny shard of ice pressing against my skin. Breakdowns? That wasn't true. Who said that? Who would do this? They wouldn't say, of course. Confidentiality, they claimed, a shield of corporate policy they hid behind. But I didn't need them to tell me. I knew. the cold, slithering certainty of it wrapped around my soul. That night my hands trembled as I dialed their number. The fury that had been simmering inside me was now a raging inferno. My mother answered, her voice laced with its usual feigned sweetness. "What the hell did you tell my boss?" I didn't bother with a greeting. There was a beat of silence. Then the performance began. "Alyssa, honey, what are you talking about? We just told them you've been under a lot of pressure lately. We were worried about you." Worried. I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You were worried? You told them I was mentally unstable. You called my place of work and fed them lies that could destroy everything I have ever built for myself." My dad's voice cut in, sharp and defensive. "It's not like you're going to lose your job, Alyssa. Don't be so dramatic. We were just trying to help. You push yourself too hard, you always have. You're not like Laya, you don't bounce back the same." And then, through the red haze of my anger, his words pierced the veil. Not like Laya. It all clicked into place, a horrifying, perfect alignment of motive and opportunity. A cold dread washed over me, extinguishing the fire and leaving behind only ice. "Where is Laya working now?" I asked, my voice low and dangerously calm. There was a flicker of panic in my mother's response. "Oh, she's between jobs at the moment," she said, the words tumbling out too quickly. "But she's been taking some online courses. She's very interested in corporate strategy. She thinks she could really thrive in your field." My blood turned to ice. My veins felt like they were filled with slush. "You're trying to get her my job." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a verdict. "Don't be so selfish," my dad snapped, his voice dripping with the familiar disappointment he reserved just for me. "She needs a chance." A real one this time. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking so badly that it slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of my apartment. They weren't just sabotaging me. They were paving a road for her with the rubble of my life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the city lights of Chicago a cold, indifferent audience to my unraveling. The next morning, the final piece of their treacherous puzzle slammed into place. I found out through an internal job posting notification that Laya had officially applied for a new strategist position within my department. A position that hadn't existed a week ago. And under the reference section of her application, she had proudly listed our father. The confirmation felt like a physical blow. And then, the gut punch. A colleague mentioned seeing Victor, my boss, having coffee with a charismatic young woman who looked remarkably like me. He'd already met with her. I was being erased. Methodically, cruelly, and with the full cooperation of the people who were supposed to be my protectors. I realized in that moment that this was a war I hadn't known I was fighting. If I didn't fight back and fight dirty, I would lose everything I had built, and they would stand over the ashes of my career, smiling sadly and pretending it was all for my own good. So I started documenting. The rage that had nearly consumed me was channeled, refined, and sharpened into a weapon. I became a ghost in my own professional life, quietly gathering every piece of evidence. Every email I was suddenly excluded from. Every HR memo about the new restructuring. Every single shift in my duties and responsibilities since the anonymous call. I compiled a timeline so precise it could have been used in a court of law, and it would be. I formally requested copies of all internal memos pertaining to my role, citing an obscure employee rights policy I'd found buried in the company's digital archives. Then, I took the money I had painstakingly saved for a down payment on a condo, my emergency fund, and I hired the sharpest, most ruthless employment lawyer I could find. But that was only the beginning of my counteroffensive. I started digging into the company's social fabric, the web of connections that existed beyond the org chart. It didn't take long to find a thread. It turned out Victor's daughter had attended the exact same exclusive, outrageously expensive wellness retreat my mother had been boasting about on Facebook for the last year. A place where ambitious mothers network over green juice and mindfulness sessions. Connections. Influence. The puzzle was forming, and at its dark, rotten center was my family. They weren't just trying to ruin me. They were trying to replace me, and I was about to make them regret they had ever underestimated their forgotten daughter. 3 weeks after that soul-crushing HR meeting, my professional life was hanging by a single, frayed thread. I had been systematically relegated to the corporate equivalent of Siberia. The woman who had been leading multi-million-dollar client calls and pitching game-changing strategies was now tasked with data entry and organizing old files. I wasn't fired, not yet. That would be too messy, too obvious. I was being phased out, managed out, made so irrelevant that my eventual departure would feel like a footnote. All the while, Laya floated through the office like a conquering hero. Victor introduced her to key stakeholders as Alyssa's wonderfully talented younger sister. She soaked in the stolen attention like sunlight, her laughter echoing in hallways where I now walked like a phantom. She even had the unmitigated gall to wink at me in the break room one afternoon, a sly, triumphant little gesture. They said you needed some time off to de-stress. She smirked, sipping a latte that was probably paid for with my parents' money. Don't worry. I'm here to help hold down the fort. It took every single ounce of my self-control not to seize that steaming cup and hurl its contents across the room. Instead, I smiled. A thin, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. Because Laya, in her blissful, arrogant ignorance, had no idea what I was building in the shadows she and my parents had cast me into. While she played office dress-up, I was constructing my siege engine. Every action they took to isolate me was documented with chilling precision. Every meeting I was excluded from was logged with the date, time, and attendees. I filed a formal 15-page complaint with HR, attaching a mountain of evidence. It meticulously proved that I was never offered mental health leave, never professionally evaluated for the claims made against me, and most critically, never given a single opportunity to defend myself against the anonymous, malicious allegations. My lawyer, a woman with eyes like chips of flint, drafted a letter to the company's board and legal counsel. It made it crystal clear that if my employment were to be terminated without significant cause and a generous severance package, a wrongful dismissal lawsuit would be filed immediately. And it would be very, very public. But I still wasn't done. The one thing my parents and Laya had always underestimated about me was my mind. They saw my success as a fluke, a product of luck and long hours. They never understood that I didn't just know strategy, I lived it. I saw the world as a chessboard, and they had just made a fatal, amateurish move. Behind the scenes, I had already reignited a conversation with Victor's biggest competitor. Marcus Thorne, the dynamic, visionary CEO of a rival firm, had been trying to court me on LinkedIn for months. I had always politely declined, loyal to the company I had helped build. Now, that loyalty was ash. I scheduled a discreet coffee meeting. When I laid out the story for him, leaving out no detail of the familial betrayal and corporate cowardice, his expression shifted from professional curiosity to shock, and then to a cold, predatory anger. They used your own family to sabotage you, he said, his eyes narrowing. They weaponized your own blood against you. Alyssa, you built one of the most profitable and accurate forecasting models this industry has seen in a decade. If your current company is too stupid and corrupt to see that, we will. He made an offer within the week. It wasn't just for a position. It was for a partnership. But I still wasn't done. I had one final move to make on the old chessboard. I waited until the day of the quarterly board meeting, the one where Victor always presented the company's strategic outlook for the next 6 months, a strategy based almost entirely on my models. This time, I showed up uninvited. I walked into that boardroom, my heels clicking like a metronome counting down the seconds of Victor's career. I didn't say a word. I simply walked to the head of the polished mahogany table and dropped a thick folder in front of the chairman of the board. Inside was the entire, damning email chain proving how I was systematically pushed out. A full copy of my HR complaint and its supporting evidence. And on top, my letter of resignation, effective immediately. There was one condition. They would pay me 6 months of severance, or the contents of that folder and the subsequent lawsuit would become the headline of every business journal in the country. They didn't even argue. The blood drained from Victor's face, leaving it a mask of white, waxy shock. I turned and walked out of that room without a single look back, the silence behind me more satisfying than any shouting match could ever be. And as for my family, oh, they were ecstatic. My mother's Facebook page became a shrine to Laya's new, promising career. They posted constantly, celebrating her brilliance, her natural talent, her bright future at the company. Their pride was nauseatingly public, until 2 weeks later the posts abruptly stopped. Laya was quietly let go, dismissed with no explanation, her natural talent apparently not enough to actually do the job. What my parents and Laya didn't know was that in the very same week she was being escorted out of the building, the firm I had just joined, Thorne Industries, announced a hostile acquisition of my former company's entire North American division. Guess who was appointed to the transition leadership team, tasked with evaluating all current personnel and restructuring the departments for the new era? Me. Guess who received a formal notice that his position had been made redundant and would not be coming back? Victor. And guess who would soon be receiving a notice of an internal ethics investigation for nepotism and the hiring of a direct family member of an employee during an active and sensitive HR complaint? Laya. The final move, however, was personal. It came on a crisp Sunday afternoon. I drove my new car to the suburban house I grew up in, dressed in a crisp navy suit that cost more than their mortgage payment. I walked up the familiar path and rang the doorbell, holding a single, heavy envelope. They looked surprised, then nervous to see me. My father, his posture immediately defensive, eyed the envelope in my hand. "What's this?" he asked, his tone gruff. "It's a cease and desist," I said calmly, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "It legally forbids you, or any agent acting on your behalf, from having any further communication with my employer or my business partners, past, present, or future. If you violate it, you'll be hearing from my lawyer." My mother gasped, clutching her chest in a theatrical display of hurt. "You're threatening your own mother." "No," I replied, my gaze as cold and hard as steel. "I'm protecting myself. Something you never taught me how to do because you were always the ones I needed protection from." Laya, who had been listening from the hallway, stormed to the door, her face a mess of anger and confusion. "This is all your fault," she shrieked at me. "They were just trying to help me." I finally turned my full attention to her, the golden child, now tarnished and lost. "No," I said, turning to walk away. "They used me to help you. And now, thanks to all of you, no one is helping anyone." I walked away without another word, leaving them standing in the doorway of the house that had once been my prison. My name was no longer just a line on their holiday brag letters, a tool for their social climbing. It was now on a legal document threatening their peace of mind. Soon, it would be on a building downtown. Revenge, I had learned, when served cold, should always come with a signature. 3 months later, I stood on the 27th floor of a gleaming glass and steel building in the heart of downtown Chicago. The words Thorne and Carrington Strategies were etched on the frosted glass wall behind me in brushed silver. What had started as a consulting partnership with Marcus Thorne had exploded into a full-fledged, powerhouse firm. It was funded by the man who had believed in my talent and powered by a hand-picked team of brilliant underdogs, many of whom I'd personally recruited from companies just like the one that had so carelessly cast me out. I had moved into a modern loft with a view of the lake, upgraded my car to a sleek German sedan, and started a mentorship program for women who had experienced workplace sabotage. My life had been rebuilt, not from the rubble of the old one, but with entirely new, stronger materials. As for the old company, the acquisition was complete. Victor was out, his resignation forced by the new board once the full scope of his mismanagement and ethical lapses came to light. Laya's name and professional profile had vanished from the internet as if she had never existed. Still, the calls came, pathetic, desperate little pleas sent to my voicemail. My mother's voice, thick with tears. "Laya's depressed, Alyssa. She hasn't left her room in weeks. How could you do this to your sister?" My dad's bitter, resentful messages. "So this is it? You're really turning your back on the family that raised you, after everything we did for you." They simply could not understand. I hadn't turned my back on them. I had simply closed, locked, and bolted the door they had slammed in my face years ago. But poetic justice has a way of circling back, its echo often louder than the original offense. 2 weeks before my firm's formal launch party, I received a formal meeting request through my assistant. It was from Victor. He wanted to meet. I agreed, but on one condition. He would meet me at my new office. No handlers, no lawyers, no team, just the two of us. He showed up looking deflated, a cheap suit hanging off his frame, a stark contrast to the tailored power posture he once projected. "I underestimated you," he said flatly, his eyes scanning the opulent office with a resentful gaze. "I know," I replied, not bothering to offer him a seat. "I lost everything," he added, a pathetic bid for sympathy. I tilted my head, offering none. "No, Victor, you gambled everything. And you lost because you made the fatal mistake of backing the wrong Carrington." He tried to offer a handshake before he left, a desperate, reflexive gesture of a bygone era of his own power. I didn't take it. I simply turned back to my floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city glow beneath me, his presence already forgotten. The night of the launch party was surreal. My team gathered on the rooftop terrace, the Chicago skyline a glittering witness to our triumph. Reporters snapped photos, high-profile clients mingled and drank champagne, and I gave a speech I never thought I would live to say. To everyone who ever told me I was too emotional, too dramatic, or too much, I said, raising my glass to the cheering crowd. Thank you. You helped me build the one thing you never saw coming: power. Without permission. The crowd erupted in applause, but the final scene of this long, painful play was reserved for my parents. A month later, my legal assistant forwarded me an interesting piece of public information. My parents had filed for bankruptcy. Apparently, after losing Laya's salary as a potential second income and facing the looming threat of my legal fees had they fought the cease and desist, they had defaulted on several major loans. Their house, the kingdom from which they had judged and dismissed me my entire life, was up for public auction. I bought it, anonymously, through a shell corporation and a silent bidder. I didn't renovate it for myself. I didn't tear it down. I turned it into a transitional housing program for young women who had been estranged from toxic families. It was renamed the Phoenix House. The local paper ran a story on the charitable endeavor. Estranged daughter turns childhood trauma into community triumph. The reporter asked if I wanted to include a quote for the piece. I did. Some daughters are born to obey, I said. Others are born to rebuild. Later that week, a single letter arrived at my office with no return address. I recognized the shaky, elegant script immediately. It was from my mother. We thought we were protecting your sister's future, it read. We didn't realize we were destroying yours in the process. I don't expect you to ever forgive us, but I hope that one day you'll be able to remember the good times. I folded the letter once, then twice, and slid it into a file in my desk drawer. The drawer was labeled simply, Lessons, because this was never just about revenge. It was about evolution. They had tried to break me with whispers, lies, and the most intimate kind of betrayal. But in doing so, they had accidentally forged the woman who no longer needed their approval to survive, and most definitely not to thrive. The story didn't end with a slammed door or a final, bitter word. It ended with my name on the skyline, and theirs, finally and forever, nowhere in sight. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.